Ezra Calloway was 43 years old, a civil infrastructure developer who had spent 18 years building government contracts out of a borrowed $31,000 and a subcontracting license he had qualified for on his second attempt. He drove a gray F-150 with a hairline crack in the passenger side mirror he kept meaning to replace. He wore steel-toed boots to client meetings because his client meetings frequently ended on active construction sites. He walked into a law office on a Thursday morning in March and heard his wife's voice through the gap of a conference room door before he reached the reception desk. "There's nothing there, David," she said. "I've been married to him for 11 years. I know what he has." He stood in the corridor for 7 seconds. He did not enter the room. He did not correct her. What she had said was confident, specific, and wrong on every point that mattered, and she had said it as though the inventory were already closed. What she had not yet been told would take everything she believed she had already understood. "Before we go any further, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss." The corridor outside Conference Room B at Hartfield Burns & Associates smelled like recirculated air and printer toner, and the morning light came through the far window flat and gray, the kind of light that makes everything in a room look like evidence of itself. Ezra had built Calloway Infrastructure Solutions, starting with that $31,000 SBA loan in 2006. Not through connections or inherited capital, but through a sequencing instinct that a municipal contracts officer in Ohio had once described as the ability to see 5 stages of a project simultaneously, which is why his bids are accurate and everyone else's aren't. He drove the same truck. He wore the boots everywhere, to site walkthroughs, to mayoral briefings, to preliminary meetings with federal procurement officers who arrived in suits and left impressed by the fact that the man across the table already knew the load-bearing specifications of the project they were about to discuss before they had finished describing it. He was the kind of man who filed his own expense reports at the end of each month, not because he couldn't have delegated it, but because the numbers told him something about the health of his own operation that he preferred to read directly. In the winter of 2018, a national infrastructure firm had offered him $18 to acquire Calloway Infrastructure outright. Imani had been in the middle of a demanding professional transition, a new role, a new city, a new network being built from scratch. The timing required stability, not disruption. He had turned down the offer. He had not mentioned it to her. He had simply said no and moved forward. He had no idea she had retained David Fair of Hartfield, Burns & Associates 30 days before she served the papers, or that she had given them a detailed inventory of what she believed he was worth. Then came the Thursday in March, and everything that followed came from that hallway. The morning light in the corridor had gone flat, and even when he heard her voice through the gap of the conference room door, the door had not been fully pulled shut. Her voice was the organized, managing register she used when a situation had already been decided in her mind, and she was simply arranging the steps that followed. "There's nothing there, David," she said. "I've been married to him for 11 years. I know what he has. The house, the truck, a small business that clears about $2 million a year, mostly payroll." A pause. "I'm not asking for a long fight. I just want out, and I want what the statute says I'm owed, which in this case is half of not very much." Her attorney's voice came back, measured and professional. "We'll run the standard financial interrogatories. Just to be thorough, of course," she said. "But I'm telling you, there's nothing." Ezra did not move toward the door. He did not clear his throat. He did not say her name. He stood in the hallway for 7 seconds, the folder he had brought for the scheduling meeting held flat against his side, and he let the words settle into their full shape. Then he noticed something. On the small credenza beside the stairwell door, there was a printed case docket, the kind of administrative document law offices left on surfaces between conference rooms. His name was on it. Imani's name was on it. And a third name he had not encountered before: Viridian Group Consulting. He photographed it with his phone. He did not reach a conclusion. He filed it away. He turned, walked back to the elevator bank, and pressed the lobby button. He did not reach for his phone. He did not call anyone. He rode down to the lobby and sat in his truck in the parking structure for 31 minutes, engine off, looking at the concrete level of the wall ahead of him. He was thinking about the word nothing, the particular confidence she had used to contain it. Not cruelty, not dismissiveness. Certainty. She had looked at the truck and the boots and the modest house on Birchfield Lane, and she had arrived at a number, and she believed the number was complete because she believed she had been standing close enough to the thing to see it in full. She had been standing beside the scaffold for 11 years. She had assumed that was the building. He started the truck. He drove back to the office. He called no one that day. 2 years before any of this, Imani had not been thinking about legal fees or asset interrogatories. What she had understood about him in the early years of the marriage was a man who was competent and reliable in a defined way, who came home on time, who fixed things without being asked, who drove her to the airport at 5:15 in the morning without complaint and was already back on a site by 7:30 when her flight landed. He was a man with a particular kind of intelligence, and she had decided, not cruelly, but with some finality, that it had a ceiling. That it seemed sufficient to her at the time. She had not tracked the inside of the business. She had seen revenue figures occasionally. He didn't conceal them. She simply did not ask beyond the surface. She had seen the folders grow on the desk in his office. She had seen the late calls and the Tuesday site visits he would not reschedule for anything. She had decided that the visible shape of it, the truck, the steel toes, the government contracts, the $2 million a year operation, was the whole of it. He had turned down 18M for it in 2018. He had not told her that. He had told her that the fourth quarter was going to require some focus, and that he might be harder to reach for a few weeks. She had said that was fine. She had been absorbed in her own transition. In the spring of 2021, she had asked him once what the company was actually worth, casually, the way people ask questions they expect simple answers to. Hard to say, he told her. Infrastructure businesses are difficult to value. The real value is in the contract pipeline and the licensing relationships, not in a single number. She had accepted that. She had not asked again. There had been a gap even before that, something he had noticed and chosen to interpret generously. In the summer of 2020, she had developed a habit of leaving certain conversations when he entered the room. Phone calls she would finish in the hallway or the bedroom, carried on in a lower register than she used when she wasn't considering who might be listening. He had noticed it the way he noticed a hairline variance in a structural bearing, not with alarm. Not yet, but with the quiet attention of someone trained to note discrepancies before committing to a conclusion. He had chosen to believe she needed more privacy than he had previously given her. He had extended that interpretation because that was the kind of man he was. A deputy commissioner of public works named Gerald Withers, who had worked alongside Ezra on a $23 water treatment project in 2017, had said something once to the project team before a difficult infrastructure review board meeting. "You want to know what good looks like in this industry?" Gerald had said. "Look at the man in the back of the room who already knows what the board is going to ask before they ask it." He had been looking at Ezra when he said it. Ezra had written the next agenda item on his notepad and kept moving. He hadn't held on to it at the time. That was what she had never once considered worth finding out. Her name was Patricia O'Say. She was 64 years old, small and composed, with silver hair cut close and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent 22 years reading documents that other people had written under pressure. She had served as Callaway Infrastructure's corporate counsel and trust administrator since 2009, and she had built the holding architecture of Ezra's business from its first reorganization forward, maintaining every filing with the precision of someone who understood that the gap between a well-documented corporate entity and a poorly documented one was precisely the width of a courtroom. She had not spoken sooner, not because she hadn't been watching. She had been waiting until he was in a place to hear it. She called him on the Friday after the Thursday in March. "I need to show you something," she said. "Come to the legal office, not the main building." He was there in 35 minutes. The room was quiet. 8 folders were organized on the table by date and subject. She had tea on the credenza. "I'm going to lay this out in sequence," she said. "I need you to let me get through all of it before you respond to any part of it." He sat down. He said, "All right." She started with Viridian Group Consulting. She had identified them through a routine monitoring alert she ran on entities that submitted records requests touching any of the Callaway holding companies. Viridian had filed a business records request with the Delaware Secretary of State 6 weeks before Imani had served the divorce papers. Not 6 days. 6 weeks. She engaged them before she filed, Patricia said. She placed the first document on the table. The evaluation request was submitted on a Tuesday. The divorce filing came 22 days later. They had been working for 3 weeks before you knew there was going to be a proceeding. Ezra looked at the document. He looked at the name. He had photographed it on the credenza at Hartfield Burns & Associates 4 days ago and filed it without a conclusion. Now it closed into a clear shape. He said nothing. That silence was everything it needed to be. Patricia placed the second folder beside the first. It was Viridian's preliminary asset assessment, the inventory they had delivered to Imani's attorneys as the working financial picture of his estate. She walked through it without editorial. What they had found, the house on Birchfield Lane, valued at $1. 2M. The F-150. Callaway Infrastructure Solutions as a single operating entity, visible annual revenue of $2. 1M, valued as a going concern at $6. 3M using a standard income multiple. That is the complete inventory Viridian submitted, Patricia said. They searched the visible layer and stopped. They did not search subsidiary registrations in Delaware or Nevada. They did not run a patent holder inquiry. They did not pull the Federal Contracting Registry or request licensing disclosure records. She paused for a moment. They asked the right questions for a standard domestic financial disclosure. This is not a standard domestic financial disclosure. She set the third folder on the table. The complete holding structure of Callaway Infrastructure Solutions, current to the most recent quarter. She went through it entity by entity. CIS Federal Holdings LLC, 14 active federal infrastructure contracts. Current value under management, $147 million. Meridian Water Systems LLC, 9 active municipal water treatment contracts, 4 international licensing agreements for proprietary treatment process technology. Combined value, $120 million. Callaway Process Technologies LLC, 14 registered patents, independently appraised the previous November. Value, $62 million. 3 commercial real estate holding LLCs, properties in 4 states. Combined assessed value, $71 million. She placed the portfolio summary on the table and set her hands flat beside it. total confirmed asset and contract value. Across all entities, $400 million. She said the number the way she said everything, without additional weight, because the number already carried all it needed. Ezra picked up his tea. He set it down. He stood and moved around the table. He looked at all 8 folders open at once, the full architecture laid out in sequence, each entity showing where it had begun and what it had fed into. He read it the way he read a set of infrastructure drawings, not examining any single section, but scanning the load paths until the connections between elements resolved into a system. He could see all of it. How the first federal contract funded the patent development. How the patents generated the licensing income that capitalized the water systems division. How 18 years of careful, unhurried sequencing had produced something that looked like nothing from the outside, if you were only looking from the outside and had never asked what was underneath. He could see the full structure of it. How one thing led to the next, led to the next. "I need Raymond," he said. "He's expecting your call," Patricia said. "I briefed him yesterday." He didn't act immediately. That was the element she had never been able to account for in her assessment of him. Because patience had always looked, from where she was standing, like the limit of his capability. She had watched him be patient with federal procurement timelines that stretched 18 months from bid submission to contract award. She had watched him be patient with planning departments that required 9 site inspections for a job that should have required 3. She had read all of it as the boundary of what he was capable of, the highest register of his response to difficulty. What she had not understood was that every complex infrastructure project operates according to a sequencing logic. You don't break ground on a foundation until the soil analysis is complete. You don't commit to a structural timeline until you know exactly what you're building on. He had been applying that principle to his professional life since he was 26 years old. She had simply never needed to watch him use it on something that actually mattered to him personally. Raymond Tate was a corporate and civil litigation attorney who called Ezra at 6:08 a.m. on a Tuesday and did not apologize for the hour. Because the hour was a function of the work, and anyone who needed him to apologize for the work was working with the wrong attorney. Within the first 8 days, Raymond had identified 3 critical scoping gaps in Viridian's interrogatory submissions. The requests had been designed for a standard domestic financial disclosure and had used statutory language that, under a technical reading, captured only single-entity business interests. They had not captured subsidiary registrations, patent-holding entities, or federal contract vehicles. They built their case on the structure of the question, Raymond said, not the structure of the answer. He brought in a forensic accountant named Priya Adesanya on the 12th day. She worked through each holding entity's documentation with the systematic precision of someone trained to understand the legal difference between money that had been concealed and money that had been correctly structured. A distinction with significant weight in a courtroom. Her assessment, delivered in writing on the 18th day, every entity was clean. Every filing was current. Every corporate separation had been maintained according to the applicable statute for its jurisdiction. The $400 million had not been hidden. It had been built, correctly, over 18 years. It had simply existed in a marriage where no one had ever asked what was underneath the visible layer. On the 21st day, Imani called. He did not answer. He listened to the voicemail that evening. Her voice was organized, professional, the cooperative register she used when she believed a situation was nearly settled and she was managing the final arrangements. She said she wanted a resolution that was fair to both parties. She had always respected him. She hoped they could handle it without things becoming complicated. Her second voicemail, 3 days later, was different in a way that would have been difficult to name, but was immediately audible. The architecture was the same. but the warmth was worked at in a way the first call hadn't required. Something in the framing had shifted. Her attorneys had clearly begun to suspect the asset picture was not what they had been given. He called her back on the 26th day. He was level and cooperative. He said he thought she was right. A structured resolution would serve everyone better. Less disruption, less cost. He suggested they convene with both sets of counsel to review the full asset picture before any settlement terms were put to paper. She agreed before he had finished the sentence. He could hear the relief she was working to keep organized behind her voice. He ended the call. Raymond was across the table, watching him. "She thinks she has the complete number," Ezra said. Raymond said nothing. He refilled his coffee. Priya's final confirmation came 11 days before the meeting. The Viridian interrogatory response window, the period during which Imani's team could have expanded their asset discovery scope, had elapsed without a supplemental filing. They had submitted their response based on the original assessment. $3 million total. They had not found a single subsidiary entity. Ezra reached the building 19 minutes before anyone was expected. He preferred it that way. The conference suite on the 22nd floor had the particular quality of rooms designed for nothing but resolution. A long table, flat overhead light, the city visible through glass along the south wall. Neutral tones, no history. A place where documents were presented and the truth was allowed to be the loudest thing in the room. Raymond arrived at 8:51, followed by Priya and then Patricia. Documents went on one side of the table in sequence. No urgency in the arrangement of them, no visible effort. The work had been done. This was simply the part where it was shown. Imani arrived at 9 o'clock with David Fair and a second attorney, a woman named Claire Ashford who specialized in high-asset domestic litigation and had been brought in when Viridian's assessment suggested a $6. 3M estate worth the additional investment. She entered with the composed bearing of someone who had already decided where the morning was going to conclude. She looked at Ezra once across the table. Brief, professional. Then she turned her attention to Raymond, as though Ezra were simply a party to the proceedings she intended to manage. Raymond addressed the room. Before any discussion of settlement terms, he said, "There are several matters requiring acknowledgement and confirmation by all parties present." He opened the first folder and began placing documents on the table. Unhurried, methodical, the pace of a man who had done this before and was not nervous about any part of it. Mr. Calloway's disclosed business interests encompass the following corporate entities. He named them in sequence. Sys Federal Holdings, LLC. Meridian Water Systems, LLC. Callaway Process Technologies, LLC. The 3 real estate holding companies. 6 entities named without inflection, each accompanied by its registration documentation. Each has operated as a distinct legal entity for between 8 and 14 years, Raymond said. Each is fully registered, compliant, and maintained in accordance with the applicable statute for its jurisdiction. Imani's expression had not moved, but the quality of its stillness had changed. The effort required to hold it in place had become visible in the set of her jaw. Priya placed the second folder on the table. Raymond walked through the numbers without weight or drama. Federal contracting portfolio, 14 active projects, $147 million under management. Municipal water treatment and international licensing, 9 contracts, 4 licensing agreements, $120 million combined. Patent portfolio, 14 registered patents, most recently independently appraised in November, $62 million. Commercial real estate holdings across 4 states, $71 million. He looked up from the page. Total confirmed asset and contract value, $400 million. Claire Ashford set down her pen. David Furr turned to the second page of the document in front of him. He turned to the third. He turned back to the first. Patricia placed the final folder at the center of the table. "I want to be precise about what we are presenting and what we are not," Raymond said. "We are not presenting a dispute over disclosure. We are confirming that this documentation is complete, accurate, and has been maintained in full compliance with all applicable corporate and tax law since each entity's founding date. The marital estate, as defined by the applicable statute, encompasses the appreciation and value of jointly held assets during the marriage period. The corporate entities themselves, their structure, their contract histories, their patent registrations, predate the marriage by between 3 and 9 years and are not marital property under the applicable statute." He closed his folder. He placed his hands flat on the table. "We'll allow time for a full review," he said. The room went quiet for 14 seconds. Ezra counted every one of them. "We'll need to review this in full," Claire Ashford said. Her voice was composed. But she was a professional, and professionals cannot entirely conceal from other professionals what is happening in their expression when the floor moves beneath them. Ezra stood. He took nothing from the table. He had brought one folder, and it had served its purpose. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Raymond's hand. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned. He looked at Imani directly. Not for the room. Not loudly. For her. Because what he was about to say was not meant for anyone else in it. "You asked for half of nothing," he said. "You were the only person in this marriage who ever believed that's what I had." He walked out. He did not look back. The legal resolution took 4 months. Not the single session Imani had expected when she had said the word nothing, with the confidence of someone who believed the inventory was already closed. What the statute defined as marital property, the appreciated value of jointly held accounts, a defined share of the equity in the home on Birchfield Lane, was settled according to the law. The corporate entities were not marital property. The settlement was what the applicable statute said it should be. A fraction of the figure she had been certain she already knew when she told David Furr there was nothing there. Viridian Group Consulting concluded their engagement with her legal team within 30 days of the full disclosure. Their final invoice covered 11 weeks of work that had produced an asset assessment worth approximately 1.6% of the actual portfolio value. David Furr filed for an extension on the remaining interrogatory responses. The extension was granted. She was carrying what she had chosen to carry. Not dramatically. Just constantly, the way weight that cannot be set down is always being carried. Professional contacts who had worked alongside Ezra for years received her inquiries politely. They did not return the follow-up. Ezra was building something. He was not in a hurry. He never had been. A water treatment infrastructure contract had been in federal submission for 18 months, a 3-state project, the largest single proposal Callaway Infrastructure had ever put forward. His engineering team had spent 11 months on the technical specifications. His regulatory team had spent 4 more coordinating the environmental review documentation. The contract award came through 6 weeks after the conference room. Value: $340 over 7 years. His name was on the letter of award. 14 months after the meeting, Callaway Infrastructure moved its executive offices into a purpose-built facility on the north side of the city. A building they had designed and constructed themselves on a site Ezra had held since 2014. His name was on the architectural drawings in the lower left corner, because he had reviewed every structural specification in the design package before the permit was filed. He framed the first federal contract, $4.7M, dated 2010, the one that had started all of it, and hung it on the wall directly across from his desk. He hung it himself, on a Tuesday morning before anyone else arrived, using a chalk line and a proper anchor. A frame hung carelessly was a frame that eventually fell. He ran a thumb along the lower edge. Level. He went to his desk. On an October morning, Ezra was in the office before anyone arrived. He made the same coffee he had always made, the same small French press, the same grind, the same 2 minutes he gave it before pressing. He stood at the window while it steeped and looked at the north side of the city below. A delivery truck at the light. 2 workers in high-visibility jackets moving along the near sidewalk. The city doing what cities do in the early hours before the noise builds. His name was on the door. His name was on the permit in the window. His name was on the $340 contract in the filing cabinet and on the 19 others lined up behind it. He heard his lead engineer arrive in the office next door, her voice already moving through a materials timeline on the phone. He picked up his coffee. He turned from the window. He had 3 contracts to review before noon. A site walkthrough at 2. A federal briefing scheduled for the following Thursday that he had been preparing for since August. He sat down. He picked up the pencil. He got to work. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've got 2 more picked out that I think you'll really enjoy.